Hello students, welcome to the MOOC course on Indian economics. Today I will deliver my lecture on appraisal of new agricultural policy in India. Agriculture is the backbone of India. Though in recent years the importance of agriculture in Indian economy has reduced, still it contributes almost 15% of the GDP of the country. And along with it, it contributes livelihood to the 55% of the total population. Just after independence, that means during 1947, the importance of agriculture was much more higher. And as a result, when independence was, India got the independence and planning was implemented, started in 1951. The agriculture sector got the highest importance in the first plan, and land reform is the natural consequence of it. And land reform is basically changes in the distribution of the lands in favor of the farmers. And as the distribution of land changes, it improved the productivity of the agricultural sector in the country during that period. But during the mid-60s, the problem of agricultural production again started, and that was due to the adverse effect of weather conditions. And the government of India imported different high-yielding variety seeds, fertilizers, etc. from different developed countries, mainly from United States. This is popularly known as Green Revolution. And during that period, the different states also adopted APMC, that means Agricultural Produce Market Committee, to implement rules in the marketing of the agricultural products. And after that, in 2 or 3 decades, then those imported technologies were implemented in the country. In 1991, when the reform was undertaken by the government of India, the agriculture sector was mainly ignored. And as it was believed by many economists as well as the politicians of the country that reform of 1991 was actually forcefully imposed on the country by international institutions like WTO, IMF, etc. And as a result of it, many economists, they ignored the fact that agriculture did not get any kind of attention in the reform of 1991. And after that reform period, the Indian economy started to grow very rapidly, and that growth was actually driven by the non-agricultural sector. And the wage of the agricultural laborers and the non-agricultural laborers, that difference of these two kind of laborers started to widen, and that gap started to increase over the time, and agriculture failed to attract more and more laborers in the agricultural sector. As a result, many economists and other politicians realized the necessity of new agricultural policy in the country. And following that, many papers, conferences were organized, and finally, in the year 2000, new agricultural policy was announced. And the main target of that policy was to increase the agricultural production by 4% rate. And as the new agricultural policy was announced and implemented in the country, the production of agricultural sector improved very rapidly. But after a few years, that means 10 to 15 years, it was again realized that another new policy is necessary, and the government, different sectors of the officials of the government, they were preparing to announce a new policy. At that point of time, COVID came into the country along with whole world. And as a result, the Union government in September 2020 announced the Three Farm Act. And those acts were actually to improve the conditions of the farmers. But when those acts were enacted, many agitations started throughout the country, and finally those acts were repealed. And in my lecture, I will discuss the new economic policy of 2000 and this Three Farm Act in details. Now, agricultural policies in India can be discussed by dividing into three phases. First phase is from 1950 to 1980. The second phase is from 1980 to 1990s. And the third phase is 2000 and thereafter. In the first phase, as I have already discussed, that the land reform policy were undertaken. That means during the beginning of the first phase, the agricultural production improved because of the changes in the distribution of land. And thereafter, productivity in the agricultural sector increased because of import of various kinds of different varieties of seeds and fertilizers and pesticides from different developed countries. And that, of course, improved the productivity of the country. And at that point of time, two institutions took the key roles. And those institutions were Food Corporation of India, or FCI, and Agricultural Prices Commission, which was later popularly known as Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. At that point of time, government took initiative to improve the production of milk, processing of milk in the country, and government invested in the agricultural sector for its improvement. And in different states at that point of time, different universities were established. Along with this, the then commercial banks started to lend to the farmers so that they don't have the problem of credit. And in that period, the national NABARD, that means the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, was established in 1982. Now I'm coming to the second phase. That means that started from 1980s to 1990s. And during that period, almost all the new technologies were undertaken, and those technologies were implemented. New technologies were also implemented in various kinds of oil seeds, pulses, etc. And during that point of time, where the government farm production was diversified into various kind of commodities like fish, milk, meat, eggs, etc. And during that point of time, that means from 1980s and 1999s, if we see that India's GDP in agriculture at constant prices, that increased by almost 80%. Now coming to the third phase. Third phase means when the new agricultural policy of 2000 was undertaken, and that policy incorporates 4% increase in the agricultural production. I will discuss the policy in details later. During the 10th five-year plan, that means during 2002 to 2007, they articulated a new kind of necessity. That means production or policies should be implemented on the basis of the geographical area of the country, and that policies were emphasized mainly on the development of agricultural policies in the northeast part of the country. The 11th five-year plan, that means the plan which was from 2007 to 2012, that identified the necessity of improvement of technology again in the agricultural sector. And thereafter, from 12th plan, that means from 2012 to 2017, the plan incorporated the idea of increase in the agricultural production more than 4% rate. At the same time, it also emphasized on diverting the employment from the agricultural sector to other sectors of the country. And thereafter, that means after 2017, Indian planning system was closed, and new type of Niti Aayog came into the Indian economy. Basically, on 28th July of the year 2000, the new economic policy was announced, and that policy mainly aimed at increase the agricultural production by 4% rate by efficient use of resources and technology, and at the same time not compromising the interests of the farmers in the WTO regime. WTO means World Trade Organization, and WTO started what was founded in 1994, and during that period, that means after the year 2000, the trade throughout the world was actually controlled by WTO. Now comes the objectives of this new agricultural policy. First objective was, as I already told you, that it was the 4% increase in the agricultural production. Second was the growth with efficiency, means efficient use of resources and technology. And the third objective was to growth with equity. Equity means growth that is widespread among the all sectors of the country, as well as among all types of farmers of the country. And the fourth was that growth which is demand driven. Demand driven means growth which considers the demand of the domestic market. And the last objective was growth that is sustainable in terms of technology, environment and economy. And the term sustainability means that growth which considers the present generation, at the same time the interests of the future generation. Now comes the features of this new agricultural policy of the year 2000. First feature was privatization of agriculture and price protection of the farmers. Second feature was private sector participation through contract farming. Contract farming means that contract will be created with the sponsors and the agricultural farmers, and the sponsors will provide funds to the farmers for their production, and that means the sponsors will supply inputs, that means fertilizers, pesticides to the farmers, and at the end of the production process, the sponsors will purchase the production in a prior fixed price. The third feature was the policy envisages to development of a national livestock breeding strategy for the development of or for the requirement for meeting the requirement of meat, eggs, etc. And the fourth feature was that high priority was given to evolve a new location specific and economically viable policy for the farm. And the fifth one was all kinds of restrictions to be removed for transfer of agricultural produce from one state to another state. In that regard, the tax on agricultural produce would be reviewed at that point of time. And another feature was that the all cess or any kind of duties that will be removed from machineries and agricultural produced from the country. Another was that rural electrification will be given importance, so that rural activities like irrigation, etc., that would get uninterrupted service electricity over the time. And in the policy of new agricultural policy of 2000, again importance was given to the use of various kinds of alternative energies. Alternative energies means solar energy, water power, etc. And another feature was that in the policy, institutionalization of credit to the farmers was incorporated. It's so that the farmers with need of fund, they could easily get credit funds for their production. And also the last feature of the new agricultural policy was that it provide a package of insurance to the farmers from the time of seed sowing to the post harvest operations. Now I will critically appraise the new agricultural policy of the year 2000. First of all, we could say that the new agricultural policy of the year 2000, that was a balanced policy because it incorporates the good decisions of all policies, right? Green revolution, white revolution, and blue revolution. So this new agricultural policy is also known as rainbow revolution. Now I'm coming to the appraisal of this policy. First is that this policy failed to meet the food sufficiency of the country. And when it was realized that it is failing from its requirement, it did not take any kind of action so that it could increase its agricultural production at more than 4% rate. And this new policy also has failed to identify the backward states which are not being able to incorporate the policies or implement the policies in their economy. At the same time, this policy has argued in favor of encouraging private investment in the agricultural sector. Now, this private investment basically will favor the big farmers of the country. This private investment, obviously, they will not think about the interest of the small farmers. So, in that respect, it is not desirable. At the same time, another point which is quite related to this last point is that this policy incorporate private sector participation through contract farming, which I have already discussed. And this participation through contract farming is actually not viable in a country or in an economy like India, where there is labor surplus. And the last thing is that there were lack of coordination between the state government and the central government in implementation of the policies of the country and policies of agricultural. And as we know, for any kind of policies to be successfully implemented, it is very necessary that there should be a good coordination between the government sectors. That means between the state governments and the central government. However, in case of a new agricultural policy, this was not there. That means there was a discrepancy between the state governments and the central government. Now I will discuss the farm bills of year 2020. There were mainly three bills. First bill was Farmers, Produce, Trade and Commerce Act 2020. And this act gives the freedom to the farmers to sell and buy farm produce at any place of the country outside APMC mandis. APMC means Agricultural Produce Market Committee, which I have already mentioned in my lecture. And to promote e-commerce in the agricultural sector, this bill actually allows the creation of an electronic platform through which farmers could sell their products. And in the bill, there were also the provision of the different types of modalities, so that modalities can be created for the traders and trade transactions in the country. And these modalities will enable the government to intervene and to regulate the system wherever it is necessary. The second bill was known as Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act 2020. This act was basically a modification of the previously started contract farming, which was started in almost 20 states of the country. And through this act, various kinds of obstruction, those were present in the contract farming, that were removed. And the act was mainly restricted to an assured price to be provided to the farmers by the sponsors. At the same time, the sponsor will supply inputs to the farmers. This means that the act was going to limit the power of the sponsors to only in supplying the inputs like fertilizers, seeds, etc., and to purchase their produce at the end of the end of the production process at a prior determined price. And the third act was related to Essential Commodities Act. In this Essential Commodities Act has been modified for various crops, foodstuffs, like including cereals, pulses, potato, onion, etc. And this modification says that the central government may intervene to the modification of prices of those commodities only when it is necessary, or when it is whether it is natural calamities or war or famine, that means in any extraordinary situations. The act is basically diluting the power of the government in intervening or determining the price of the products. Now I will discuss the objectives of these three bills. The first objective was obviously to increase the production or productivity in the agricultural sector. Second objective was to raise the per hectare production in the agricultural sector. Third objective was to protect the interest of the small farmers. Fourth objective was to modernize the agricultural sector. And the fifth objective was to check the environmental degradation. That means to control the environmental degradation in the country. And the sixth objective was agricultural research and training. And the last objective was to remove any kind of obstructions, bureaucratic obstructions that were prevailing in the agricultural sector. Now, as we know that any kinds of policies always have some positive impacts and negative impacts. So, I will discuss the positive impacts and the negative impacts that would likely to be happen to the agricultural sector of the country. Let me start with the positive impacts. The first positive impact that was that this bill actually allows the farmers to sell their products outside the APMC mandis. Also, there were provision to sell their products in those mandis, but still the additional positivity was that they could sell anywhere. Second was that any kind of levy, the farmers don't have to pay any kind of levies whenever they sell their produce outside those mandis. And the third positive impact was that it permits interstate transfers of the agricultural produce. Another positive impact would be that it would increase the business opportunities for the youth of the country, especially those who are the children of the farmers. For them, they would get many kinds of business opportunities if according to this act. Another positive thing was it encourages contract farming, and in this and it modified the conditions of the contract farming. So, and as a result of this, actually, if those new bills were implemented, the farmers could get into touch with the buyers, actual buyers. So, this bill was going to remove the intermediaries between the farmers and the buyers, and that would obviously protect the interest of the small farmers. The last positive thing of this act was the sponsors were prohibited from any kind of ownership rights from the land. So as a result, as those sponsors did not have any kind of ownership rights, they will not be able to exploit the farmers. Now I am coming to the negative impacts of the three acts. First was that though the farmers were able to sell their products outside mandis, within mandis the levy rate was very high. Second was that the problem with the act was many farmers fear that if these three laws is actually implemented, then the central government will gradually stop the public procurement of the farmers' produce through MSP, that is minimum support price, and they feared that ultimately the government will stop procurement through this MSP. Another one is that with the third act, which was Essential Commodities Act, in this act actually they ignored very important two inputs, those are fertilizers and seeds. Now I am coming to the repealing of the three farm bills. And as I have already told you that the farm bill was first enacted in the year 2020 September, and when the bill was actually enacted, agitation started all over the country, and that agitation was mainly concentrated in Punjab and Haryana, and among the big farmers. And as a result of those agitation, the Supreme Court on 12th January 2021, they actually stayed the implementation of those three acts in the country. And the Supreme Court formed formed a committee to look into the grievances of those farmers. And finally, on the 1st December of 2021, the laws were finally repealed, and the Supreme Court appointed committee report was made published on 21st March 2022. Now I will conclude my lecture. So what we have learned, that agriculture is the backbone of our country. So after independence, various kinds of initiatives or policies were undertaken by the government. However, among those policies, new economic policy of the year 2000 was very important, because it is a policy which covered the total area. And in this lecture, I have discussed the new economic policy in details. That means its objectives, its features, as well as its criticisms. And after that, in recent years, that means during the COVID period, the union government undertaken or enacted 3 farm bills in the year 2020, and those 3 farm bills where there were many kind of provisions for the development of the conditions of the small farmers. However, whenever it was announced or enacted, agitation started in the country. So in this lecture, I have discussed the objective of those 3 bills, and I have also briefly mentioned the 3 bills, and then the positive impacts and the negative impacts of those 3 bills were discussed thoroughly. And so thank you so much for listening to me.